definition under the product monopoly and perfect competition in the labor market or the factor market, as I was giving it to you. I told you the difference between the VMP, the MRP, and so on and so forth. And I told you that the VMP is ahead of the MRP. And so we did two cases. We discussed the first case. We have yet to discuss the second case. I'm talking about a producer, all right, the monopolist himself, all right, who is demanding labor, and he is taking only one variable factor, the labor as the one variable factor, and with the help of that, we derive the demand curve. Today, we are going to take up another case, case 2, what or how the monopoly's demand for labor curve is going to be derived when there are two variable factors. We are taking two variable factors. The first variable factor will be the labor, and the second variable factor will be the capital. All right. Now, we all know that, of course, whenever there are more than one variable factor in the process of production, all right, the value for marginal product of the labor curve and the marginal revenue productivity labor curve, they are not representing the demand curve. They are not the demand curves, क्योंकि दो हमारे पास variable factor हैं, all right, labor भी है, तो labor का जो demand है वो कैसे कैपिटल की भी डिमांड हो सकती है, ऐसा नहीं होता. हम यहाँ पर दो क्योंकि वेरिएबल फैक्टर्स ले रहे हैं, तो दो अलग अलग डिमांड कर्व भी होने चाहिए, या हम किसी तरह से डिमांड कर्व को डिराइव करें, जैसे कि पिछले केस में भी किया था हमने, लेकिन यहाँ पर हम डिमांड कर्व को डिराइव कर रहे हैं. All right, और डिराइव करेंगे किस तरह से? I'm just going to show it to you. I'm going to make a diagram and I'm going to explain everything to you. Now, here is a case when the monopolist is a producer and he is taking two factors as the variable factor. Always remember that he's not taking one factor as the variable factor. He's taking two factors as the variable factor. One is the labor and the other is the capital. So this is the case 2 of the thing that we were already discussing. Now here we have on the OX axis, I am going to take the labor, and on the OY axis, I am just taking the wage rate. All right, and this is how we are going to actually talk about it. Now I am making the diagram here, and first of all, I am just showing you the supply curve. All right, the supply curve of the labor, and I am showing you the marginal revenue productivity of the labor curve, and this is definitely not showing you the demand curve of the labor. This is just the marginal revenue productivity curve of the labor. Here we have the supply of labor curve, all right, and we have the marginal revenue productivity of the labor curve. So let the marginal revenue productivity of the labor curve be MRPL1 and the supply of labor curve be SL2. So let this be the situation. And at this point, the wages are determined, and the wages that are being given at this point are W2. So the equilibrium that is going to be established is the point where the marginal revenue productivity and the supply of labor curve, they intersect one another. At this point, OL1 laborers are employed, all right, OL1 laborers are employed when the wages being given are OW2. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
So given this wage rate OW2, the monopolist is, standing at an equilibrium position at point E1. Now the monopolist is employing OL1 units of labor. Suppose what happens, the wage rate falls, all right? The wage rate falls because the laborer feels that we are not being employed enough. So the perfect competitive market, where there is perfect competition in the labor market, all right, the wages will fall, say, to OW1, and my supply of labor curve falls from SL2 to SL1. Now, please pay attention to this point. Now, in this situation, अगर तो सारी चीजें हम क्या कहते हैं, all other remains, if all other things remain the same, or if all other things remain constant, or ceteris paribus, अगर wage rate fall होता है, तो मोनोपोलिस्ट को MRPL1 कर्व से यहाँ नया इक्विलिब्रियम बना लेना चाहिए था. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
लेकिन other things do not remain constant here, because we are not talking about one to one variable, we are talking about one to two variables. That is, here the two factors are variable. So instead of making or framing an equilibrium with the new supply curve and the old MRP curve is not possible here. The other things are not constant here. So we always assume that let other things be constant. We are not assuming other things to be constant. The other things are not at all constant here. As a result, what will happen with the new supply curve, when the wages will fall down, the supply curve will also come down, all right? And here what will happen, since the other things do not remain the same, because the factors are interdependent on one another, the fall in the wage rate from OW2 to OW1 will cause three kinds of effects. It will cause substitution effect, it will cause output effect, and it will cause profit maximization effect. How will it cause output effect? How will it cause profit maximization effect? अब अगर लेबरर्स अपने वेज रेट कम कर देते हैं तो क्या होगा? Tell me what will happen. You will employ more laborers?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. If you will employ more laborers, productivity will happen?
Yes, ma'am.
Productivity will happen, and what will you do? What will you do? More production will take place. That is, you are using more capital.
Yes, ma'am.
So substitution of the labor and capital will take place.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. But at the same time, you are not ignoring the labor. You are employing better methods where you are thinking of upgrading the labor as well. Yes or no? You're giving them training, you're hiring better workers. Isn't that so?
Yes, ma'am.
So there is a substitution effect, there is an output effect, and all this is going to give the profit to whom?
Producer.
To the producer. And who's the producer here? The monopolist. Isn't that so? So there is an output effect, there is a profit maximization effect, and there is a substitution effect. So because other things are not constant here, the factors are interdependent, so this equilibrium does not happen. Rather, a new marginal revenue productivity curve, all right, because of the output and profit maximization effect, all right, there will be need for more capital. Because more capital is being used, there is going to be increase in the productivity of the labor, and hence the productivity of the labor is being increased. So marginal productivity of the labor will increase, and with the increase in the marginal productivity of the laborer, the marginal revenue productivity curve moves rightwards. And so we have the second marginal revenue productivity curve, and now we are going to be in equilibrium. We are going to be at a new equilibrium E2, where we are going to hire more laborer at lesser wages. Yes or no? Yes, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Now, if I join this new and the old marginal, these new and the old equilibrium points, I will finally get my demand for labor curve. Have you understood this? Yes, Vijay.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is how we determine the demand for labor curve, and this is the market demand for the labor curve, and this is how, when the two variables or are the two inputs are variable, the capital and the labor, this is how we are going to derive the demand for labor curve. Now the demand for labor curve has been derived when we were using one variable factor. The demand for labor curve is derived when we are using two variable factors. Now here, the product market is characterized by monopoly or monopolistic competition in this case, and the variable factor, and we are saying that it is the perfect competitive market which is supplying the labor, all right, which is the variable factor. So the factor, price, and employment are determined here just the way they were being determined in the perfect competitive market. There is going to be the market equilibrium of the factor price of employment of the variable factor, all right, which is determined by the intersection of the forces of demand and supply. So the point where the market demand and the supply, they intersect one another, that will be the point of the price and output, which is going to be determined. So everything else is going to be the same. Now that we know the supply curve, now that we know the demand curve, the intersection of the two will not only give me the price, will also determine the equilibrium output. Is that clear to all of us? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So the major idea in this entire situation is to acquire a demand curve, all right? And once the demand curve is acquired, the supply of labor curve is already known. The point where they intersect will be the point of equilibrium price and equilibrium output. Now we come across another problem, that when there is this guy who's the producer, all right, and he's a monopolist, all right, and he's the one who has to hire the labor, how is it possible that he's not going to exploit the laborer? How is it possible that he's not going to exploit the labor? If you are a monopolist and you are the one who's hiring the labor, what is your main aim? Your main aim is to profit maximize, yes or no?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
And how are you going to do that? You are going to cut down every extra wastage that is counting on you. You will cut down on the cost of production. You will charge a very high price. You will aim at profit maximization. So we are going to do a case wage determination and exploitation of the labor under monopoly. So we are going to discuss that now. And let me first tell you that we know that the wage rate under the conditions of monopoly in the product market and perfect competition in the labor market is determined at a point where the derived demand curve of labor intersects the supply of labor curve. All right. So when there is equilibrium wage rate is already determined, all right, there is an element of exploitation we are going to see which is happening with the labor. All right. Now, how this exploitation of labor takes place by the monopoly firm or the monopolistic firm, whosoever is there in the product market, all right, let us see the cause. All right. Now, first of all, I am going to divide again the chapter or the exploitation cases into two. I am going to show you the exploitation under two conditions. One, when the exploitation of labor is taken place by a monopoly firm, and of course, when the exploitation of labor is being taken by the monopolistic firm. So there are two cases that we are going to do. The first case that I'm going to discuss is how the exploitation takes place by the monopoly firm. So I am going to make a diagram for that before I really go ahead with the understanding. So make a heading within the same. We haven't yet finished this chapter. The wage determination and exploitation of labor. Wage determination and exploitation of labor under monopoly. Under monopoly. Case one. Exploitation of labor by monopoly firm, and case two, exploitation of labor by monopolistic firm or under monopolistic competition. So I'm making a table here and I want you to look at the table. On the OX axis, again, I'm taking labor, and on the OY axis, I'm taking the wage rate. So I am making the two curves. First is the value, the VMP curve, and the other is the MRP curve of the labor. Then the third curve I have drawn is the supply of labor curve, which is determining the wage rate as well. The equilibrium is established where MRP is intersecting the supply of labor curve at point E here. And the number of laborers that are being hired at this point is OL1. OL1. extend the EL1 line up till VMP, and the point where it touches VMP, call that point H. Call this point H. And the point where the supply of labor curve touches the VMP line, the supply of labor curve touches the VMP line, call that point A and bring down, draw perpendicular from point A to OX axis, and call this point L2. Call this point L2. Have you all drawn this?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Have you drawn everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, very conveniently, I'm going to explain it to you. The diagram is before me. Now, when I look at the exploitation of labor by the monopoly firm, all right, let's see how is it caused. Let's look at the market demand curve for labor by the monopoly firm. And it will be, of course, based on the marginal revenue productivity curve rather than the VMP curve. I have given you the explanation to it already. All right. Now, the exploitation takes place because the labor is being paid wages equal to the marginal revenue productivity and not equal to the value of marginal productivity, as I already have told you. This is what we discussed in the beginning of the class, that because this guy is a profit maker, this guy is not going to give the wages according to the price of the product. He's going to give the wages equal to the marginal revenue. All right, so he is not giving according to the VMP, because VMP is MPP into the price, that is a average revenue, and he is giving wages according to the MRP, which is MPP into the MR. So why does the exploitation take place? Because he's a cunning guy. He knows how I have to make my money. So he is not paying according to the VMP, which is supposed to be paid, but he is paying according to the MRP. And that is why we can say that he is the guy who is, exploiting the people. Now, if we look at the diagram very clearly, we have seen that the marginal revenue productivity curve, which is actually representing the monopoly's labor demand curve in this case, and we have seen the supply of labor curve line as well, the both intersecting. And a profit maximizing monopolist is, only OL1 units of labor, and he is paying a wage rate equal to EL1. But under perfect competition in the product market, all right, the VMP is the labor demand curve. You have to realize that this is, if this guy, if there had been the factor market में perfect competition है, तो उसका demand curve ये है, but monopolist इसको अपना demand curve बना लेता है. So demand curve and supply curve they intersect at point E, और ये wages दे रहा है EL1, जबकि इसको wages देने चाहिए थे equal to HL1. So how much is the amount of exploitation he is doing to the laborer? The amount of exploitation which is being done to the laborer is to the tune of HE. Can you see that? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So the extent of monopolistic exploitation of labor can easily be seen here. HE is the amount of exploitation which is being, conducted by the laborer, by the monopolist. Other than that, there is not only exploitation of labor, but also another big social, demerit is arising out of the monopoly in the product market. And what is that? It is that he is not employing as much laborers as he is supposed to be employing. All right. अगर यही सिनेरियो एक परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिटिव मार्केट होती, और राइट, अगर उसने हायर करनी होती लेबर, तो इस वेज रेट पे वो इतनी सारी लेबर हायर करते, they would have hired OL2 amount of laborers rather than OL1 amount of laborer, because ये monopolist है, अपनी cost of production reduce करेगा, ये wages भी कम दे रहा है, ये laborers भी कम employ कर रहा है. So L1, L2 amount of people are remaining unemployed. Can you understand this? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So there is a two-way loss. There is a two-way loss. Not only is he giving lesser wages, the wages should have been HL1, but he's giving only EL1. So this is the amount of monopolistic exploitation in terms of wages. But he is also hiring lesser number of people. He should be hiring this much. He's hiring only this much. So this is the amount of lesser employment he is generating in the economy. Is that clear to all of us? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So everybody has understood the exploitation by the monopolist firm?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's take the case of exploitation by the monopolistic circumstances, how exploitation takes place under monopolistic competition. I am going to make another diagram here. Another diagram. This is an interesting diagram. Another interesting diagram. I just love one thing about micro is that everything can be explained diagrammatically. Again, OX axis, I'm taking labor. OY axis, I am taking your wage rate. All right. Now here the supply of labor curve, I'm going to make it a little different. And then of course your usual MRP curve and your usual VMP curve. And it's a very simple diagram, don't worry. If you can look at the diagram, all of you, can you look at the diagram?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so there is an upward rising supply curve of labor. We have the VMP curve, which is the D for C, and we have the MRP curve, which is the D for M. The point where the MRP curve intersects the supply of labor curve, that is equilibrium of M with wage rate M and labor M. And where the VMP curve, which is the DC curve as well, all right, it intersects the supply curve. It is the point EC where WC wages are given and LC amount of labor is employed. Kindly draw it quickly.
Ma'am, DC here means?
I will just tell you everything, don't worry. You can't just draw the diagram because it's very difficult to hold me like this for a long time. I will explain everything. Yeah. Everybody, have you made it?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody, Anshika, Arushi,
Yes, ma'am.
Shivani, Tamanna, yes, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now here, what have I done is I have drawn a supply curve. All right. The exploitation of labor we are going to see under monopolistic competition. And this is going to be at the market level. Now the DM curve is the market demand curve for the labor. All right. DM curve is the market demand curve of the labor by the monopolistic firms. All right. And DC is the market demand curve of labor in the perfect competitive firm. Have you understood now, Muskan Bache?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So we have two market demand curves. One is the market demand curve of the monopolistic competitive market, and the other is the market demand curve of the perfectly competitive market. Now, we know the supply curve of the labor is represented as L. Now, under monopoly and monopolistic competition, whatever the case would have been, the labor market is an equilibrium at EM. If you can all see that, the labor market is at an equilibrium EM, all right, and they are employing only OLM amount of laborers and paying only OWM amount of wages. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
But if the employer was a perfect competitive firm, he would have not only given higher wages equivalent to OWC, but would have hired more labor as well. Can you see it? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So the tune of exploitation is equal to WMWC. all right, and the number of laborers that are being hired less. Again, here is LMLC. Can you see it, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is according to this is what is the exploitation of labor under monopolistic competition according to John Robinson, and this exploitation of labor is very very common. All right, and Mrs. John Robinson, who also gave the which yeah he she gave the modern theory of rent. She was really really against this whole phenomena, and she criticized, and her view on exploitation of labor by the monopolist have been somehow questioned. All right, why they have been questioned? Because she said that the lower wage payment is given to the people. All right, but you have to realize that the lower wage payment is inevitable because हमारा जो डिमांड कर्व है यहाँ पर दो अलग अलग डिमांड कर्व हैं. एक मोनोपोलिस्ट का डिमांड कर्व मार्जिनल रेवेन्यू प्रोडक्टिविटी कर्व है जो डाउनवर्ड स्लोपिंग होता है, और दूसरा जहां पर परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिटिव मार्केट आ जाती है वहां का जो डिमांड कर्व है वो वीएमपी कर्व है. ऑल राइट, और एक जो है वो जितना कॉस्ट टू कॉस्ट उसको पड़ रहा है वो उतना उसको वेज रेट दे रहा है. दूसरा ऑब्वियसली अपना प्रॉफिट मार्जिन रखेगा क्योंकि उसको लगता है कि भाई मैं आई शुड बी कीपिंग अ लिटिल प्रॉफिट टू माई सेल्फ रादर देन गिविंग इट ऑल टू द to everybody, and I have to reduce my cost of production. Makes a big sense. All right, but this is all happening because there is product differentiation. Even a monopolist exercises product differentiation, and even a monopolistic competitive firm exercises product differentiation. No such thing is being done by a perfect competitive market. Is product differentiation exercised by perfect competitive market?
No, ma'am.
No, no, they are making homogeneous goods or identical goods, and as a result product differentiation जो है वो brand loyalty बनाता है. लोग they stick to the brands, and because of which जो हमारा demand curve है it will always slope downward. And in case of a downward sloping demand curve, always and always remember, if you have to sell more, you will bring down the price, and if you think that the elasticity is less, you will always charge a higher price. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So this difference of OWC and OWM is not exploitation of labor. All right, it is not at all exploitation of labor. It is arising because there are different market conditions. Have you understood, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
And if there is more product differentiation, all right, then monopolistic sellers, they can augment, as per Mrs. John Robinson, they can exploit more laborers. But this is not happening because of deliberate issues. This is happening because there is product differentiation. So this is where Mrs. John Robinson was actually questioned for the very concept of exploitation. Is that clear to all of us?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so we are over with the first case, and the first case was monopoly in the product market and perfect competition in the labor market. That is, monopoly is the producer, or monopolistic firm is a producer, and who is the factor market or the labor market, who is providing the laborer, is there is this perfect competition. Have you understood, all of you? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now we are going to do second case, and the second case is that there is product monopoly. Product monopoly means the producer is a monopolist, and there is monopsony in the factor market. That is, there is a single buyer and a single seller. Are you getting my point? There is monopoly in the product market and monopsony in the factor market. There is a single buyer and a single seller. Have you understood, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Right. So write down wage determination. Wage determination under product monopoly. So single seller, bracket में लिख लो बेशक, single seller, and factor monopsony. And factor monopsony, bracket में लिख लो single buyer. So we are going to discuss a case where there is monopoly in the product or the commodity market, as you want to call it, and there is monopsony in the factor market or the input market. So there is a single buyer, all right, single input, labor, and there exists monopsony in the labor market. So, and there is a single producer, all right, or single output maker, and he is the monopolist. So, this model is going to be very, very interesting, all right. The product monopolist is also a monopolist in the labor market, and the labor supply is competitive. How am I going to really justify this? I am just going to tell you. All right. Now, when we talk about the wage rate determination and employment conditions under monopoly in the commodity market and monopsony in the labor market, all right, it is very, very important to understand this kind of scenario for monopolistic competition and oligopoly in the commodity market and monopsony and oligopsony in the factor market. So we are doing a number of cases at the same time. We are not only discussing single buyer and single seller case, we are also discussing a case जब मोनोपोली जो है कमोडिटी मार्केट में है, ठीक है, बट साथ में लेबर मार्केट में मोनोपोली भी हो सकती है, लेबर मार्केट में मोनोपोलिस्टिक कंपटीशन भी हो सकता है, लेबर मार्केट में ओलिगोपोसोनी भी हो सकती है, और राइट, और इस तरह से लेबर मार्केट में आपकी ओलिगोपोली भी हो सकती है. सो वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस दीज फ्यू केसेस, ऑलराइट. आपको ऑल्दो इतने कॉम्प्लिकेटेड केसेस आते नहीं है, but for the same, the explanation for all of them is going to be the same. The same diagram is going to the same diagram is going to explain all the cases. अब again, जब हम वेज एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट डिटर्मिनेशन की बात कर रहे हैं मार्केट में, वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस अंडर टू केसेस, ऑलराइट. नंबर वन, जैसा हमने पहले किया था, सिंगल वेरिएबल फैक्टर, all right, and number two, when more than one variable factor is used, that is we are using labor as well as capital both as a variable factor. So we are going to discuss this scenario of how the wage and employment are being determined in this kind of single buyer single situation when there is a single variable factor, labor, and number two, when there are two variable factors, both labor and capital in demand. So let's explain here. For one thing also, I just need to explain it to you, is the marginal cost of labor curve. All right, this is a very important curve that we are going to introduce, the marginal cost of labor curve. The marginal cost of labor curve is nothing but the supply curve of labor. I hope we all understand that. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So we are discussing the first case first. And what is the first case first? That is, we are taking one factor here and one variable factor. So write down marginal cost of one variable factor, marginal cost of one variable factor, case one, or you can write down, yeah, I think that is, you can write it down like that. One variable factor, bracket mein labor, bracket mein labor. So before I explain anything out to you, again, I'm going to talk to you through a table and a diagram. Give me a second, Vijay, 1 second. Are you written? All right, I'm sorry, I was caught somewhere. Now, before I talk to you about anything else, अब हमारे पास केस है सिंगल बायर और सिंगल सेलर का. ठीक है, बायर हो गया हमारा monopsony market, which is in the labor market. ठीक है, और सिंगल सेलर हो गया हमारा अपना मोनोपोलिस्ट. ठीक है, वो प्रोड्यूसर. अब आपको पता होना चाहिए कि जब परफेक्ट कंपटीशन था लेबर मार्केट में, तो हमारा सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर कर्व कैसा था? इट वाज पैरेलल, हॉरिजॉन्टल कर्व, पैरेलल टू द ओएक्स एक्सिस. यस और नो?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? But now there is monopsony in the labor market. There is a single seller. So any day my supply of labor curve will not be, it will not be a parallel curve. All right, it will not be a parallel curve. Rather, the supply of labor curve here is going to be an upward rising curve, which is denoted by the marginal cost curve of the labor. Why an upward rising curve? Because यहाँ पर जो बैठा है बंदा वो परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिटिव नहीं है. ठीक है, वो परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिटिव मार्केट का नहीं है, वो सिंगल सेलर है जी. वो भी अपनी टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस पे अपने आप को अवेलेबल कराएगा. क्या टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस है? ज्यादा वेज दोगे तो ज्यादा लेबर प्रोवाइड करूंगा, कम वेज दोगे तो कम लेबर प्रोवाइड करूंगा. हैव यू अंडरस्टूड?
Yes, ma'am.
राइट. सो यहाँ पर जो हमारा सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर कर्व है वो डेफिनेटली वैसा नहीं है जैसा परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिटिव मार्केट में था. सो यहाँ पर हमारा जो सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर कर्व है, all right, which is, it is being played by the marginal cost curve of the labor. Have you understood this, everybody? Yes or no? So there is a difference between the marginal cost curve and the average cost curve. There are two different average costs. वहां पे क्या था? वहां पे क्या था? Because it is a single curve, the supply of labor curve is single, so average cost is equal to the marginal cost. Is it clear? Or the average wage is equal to the marginal wage. ये यही हम डायग्राम बनाते रहे हैं हमेशा. लेकिन यहाँ पर हमारा जो मार्जिनल कॉस्ट कर्व है, और राइट, वो अपवर्ड राइजिंग है. सो मेरा एवरेज कॉस्ट और मार्जिनल कॉस्ट दोनों अलग अलग हो जाते हैं यहाँ पर. Is that clear to all of us here?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now let me make a table to you. All right, I am making a table, and with the help of the table I'm going to, this is just the basic. अभी हमने कुछ करना शुरू नहीं किया और अभी तक मैं आपको कुछ करा भी नहीं रही. ये सिर्फ जो जब मैं टेबल बना रही होती हूँ, I'm just making you understand the basics. So we are dividing our page into 4 columns. The first column is the units of labor. The second column is average cost of labor. And average cost of labor is also the average wage curve. It is average wage curve. And then the total labor cost. The total labor cost. और फिर आ गया मेरा मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर. और ये मैं निकालूंगी मेरी टोटल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर में से और मेरी एवरेज कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर में से, जो कि मेरा एवरेज वेज भी है. Now, if you have to look at this table, as I go on employing more and more units of labor, my total cost of labor goes on increasing. Along with an increase in the total cost of labor, मेरे खर्चे तो बढ़ रहे हैं, मेरी एवरेज कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर भी बढ़ रही है, यानी मेरा एवरेज वेज भी बढ़ रहा, और एवरेज कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर जो मैं उनको एवरेज वेज दे रही हूँ, और मेरी मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर भी बढ़ रही है. सपोज मेरी टोटल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर बढ़ रही है बाय दिस मच और मेरी एवरेज कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर बढ़ रही है बाय दिस मच. So what is going to be my marginal cost of labor? It is going to be TCL of L minus TCL of L minus 1. So 5 is written as it is. 12 minus 5 7. 21 minus 12 is 9. 32 minus 21 is 11. 45 minus 32 is 13. 60 minus 45 is 15. And 77 minus 60 is 17. This is how I am going to calculate my marginal cost of labor. Is that clear to all of us? Yes, everybody?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So on the basis of the information that I have drawn, I am also going to make a table now and making a sorry make a diagram now, and the diagram on the basis of this. So this is just the basic diagram. What this is just going to be the basic diagram, nothing else. The diagram is going to be like this. This is not explaining anything for now. It is just your basic diagram. The basic diagram is actually saying that my marginal cost curve and my average cost of labor curve, which is also my average wage curve, they both are upward sloping. Have you understood? Everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
So I have just taken out this. This is not any case. This is not case one. This is not case two. Nothing. Nothing. अभी तक अभी मैंने कुछ भी नहीं किया. This is just the basics. This is just the basic. तो उसकी जो मैंने आपको heading लिखवाई थी, आप सिर्फ लिख दो the marginal cost of a variable factor. बस that's it. The marginal cost of the variable factor कि हम उसको determine कैसे कर रहे हैं. That's it. Is it clear? Everybody?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Now we are going to discuss the first case. The first case, how are the wage and the number of laborers employed under monopoly in the product market and monopsony in the factor market when we are using only one variable factor. So write down wage and employment, wage and employment under monopsony, when there is one variable factor, when there is one variable factor, bracket में labor, bracket में labor, everybody have you written?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
राइट और जहां आपने पिछले डायग्राम में एवरेज वेज बनाया था उसको आप एमसी को लिख दो मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर कर्व और जो एवरेज कॉस्ट ऑफ लेबर कर्व बनाया था आपने जिसको एडब्ल्यू बी हमने कहा था दैट इज आल्सो कॉल्ड द सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर कर्व the supply of labor curve. Why supply of labor curve? Upward rising hai. Higher the wages given, higher will be the employment. Lower the wages given, lower will be the employment.
Ma'am, supply of labor is MCL.
एक्चुअली तो एमसी होता है क्योंकि हम जितना ज्यादा बट बिकॉज दोनों अपवर्ड राइजिंग हैं और राइट वो कहता तो है कि हमें तभी मैं आपको एक्सप्लॉयटेशन का कॉन्सेप्ट समझाऊंगी देने तो हमें एमसी जितने वेजेस चाहिए पर हम देते एडब्ल्यू जितने वेजेस ठीक है सो आई वांटेड टू एक्चुअली टेल यू दिस लेटर ऑन बट दोनों ही आपके सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर कर्व्स हैं बट इन डिफरेंट सिनेरियोज इतना देना चाहिए पर दिया जाता नहीं इज दैट क्लियर मुस्कान
Yes, ma'am.
right so I am going to talk about it now let's start discussing the diagram let me first make the diagram and then I'm going to explain it to you on the OX axis, I am taking labor. On the OY axis, I'm taking wages. My marginal revenue for productivity curve. And then, of course, my marginal cost for labor curve. And then my supply of labor curve or my average wage curve or the average cost of labor curve, as you want to call it. Equilibrium is at E. This is the labor that is being employed. Let's call this point M, call this point W. And we make this diagram. OX axis take wages, OY axis take OX axis take labor, and OY axis take wages and marginal revenue productivity. Have you all drawn? Yes, Vijay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, I've already discussed out to you is that monopoly का demand curve VMP नहीं होता, वो perfect competitive का होता है, लेकिन monopoly का demand curve MRP होता है. हमने discuss किया हुआ है ये बात.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So if we go by that rule, all right, so the marginal revenue productivity of labor curve represents the monopolists, monopsonist demand curve for labor, and the marginal cost for labor curve represents the the supply curve also, and also the marginal cost of labor curve. अब कोई भी profit maximizing monopsonist होगा, all right, he will want to employ labor where marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. यही हमारी condition of equilibrium है, where marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. If that is the condition कि कोई भी monopsonist उस level पर labor enjoy करेगा where MRP या marginal revenue productivity is equal to the marginal cost. So in this particular diagram that we have drawn, we know that they both are intersecting at point E. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
And the monopsonist is hiring how many units of labor? How many he's employing how many units of labor?
OL.
So OL is the equilibrium level of employment. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So when I look at this EL ordinate, when I look at this perpendicular line EL ordinate, all right, it is intersecting the labor supply curve at point M. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? And this is actually when it is intersecting the labor supply curve at point M, it is actually trying to determining the equilibrium wage rate corresponding to the equilibrium level of employment, that is OW. So OW, or when I'm talking about this kind of arrangement that is being made, where OW is the wage payment which is being given and ML is the wage rate which is being given, he would have been happy, the situation would have been happy that मैं इतने laborers को काम दूं, इतने laborers को काम दिलवाऊं क्योंकि वो फैक्टर मार्केट में है और उसको इतने wages मिलने चाहिए. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
लेकिन वहां पे कौन बैठा है, खरीदार कौन है? मोनोपोलिस्ट.
Yes, ma'am.
राइट. तो वो क्या, वो जाने देगा, वो जाने देगा वो कितने लेबरर्स को एम्प्लॉय करता है. लेबर वो उतनी एम्प्लॉय करता है, उसकी एक कंडीशन मान लेते हैं, ठीक है, आई एम गोइंग टू गिव एम्प्लॉयमेंट टू ऑल द लेबरर्स ओनली इफ आई गिव दिस मच अमाउंट ऑफ वेजेस. हैव यू अंडरस्टूड?
Yes, ma'am. So EM is the exploitation.
Yeah, it's EM is the amount of exploitation. Have you understood, Bache?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Now we are going to do the second case. The second case is we are going to talk about wage and output employment, or wage and employment determination, when there are two variable factors, that is capital and labor. So we are going to be talking about the second case, and we are also going to show the exploitation here as well. And I'm going to make another diagram. Here I have the marginal revenue productivity curve as well. I have the value of marginal productivity labor curve as well. I have the marginal cost curve, and I have the average wage curve, or which is also called the supply curve of the labor curve. Equilibrium, just give me 1 second and let me draw it, and then I'm going to explain everything to you. If you all can see the diagram, can you all see the diagram?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, OX axis I have taken labor, and OY axis I have taken the wage rate, I have taken VMP, I have taken MRP. VMP of L and MRP of L. So average wage rate is also the supply curve of labor. We all know that. MRP is the demand curve of labor, and VMP is the market demand curve of labor. Summation. Condition of equilibrium. MRP is equal to MC. Equilibrium here. We draw a line, bring it OL1, extend it to P here. From P, draw perpendicular down to OL2. The point where MRP touches the AW line, call that point M. Bring it back, call it W2. And the point where EW intersects the supply of labor curve, call that point T, and bring it back, call it OW1. Have you all drawn it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, what is happening here? Monopoly product market में है, and this guy who is the monopolist, he will do monopolistic exploitation of labor. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Monopsony है, जो monopsony है वो अपनी exploitation करेगा, so there is going to be monopsonistic exploitation as well. एक single buyer है, एक single seller है. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
But I am going to show that monopsonistic exploitation is much more than monopolistic exploitation. Monopsonist जो है, he will pay wages to labor not only less than its VMP but also less than the MRP. Let's have a look at it. अब जब हम monopsonistic exploitation of labor की बात करते हैं, हम actually उसकी जो exploitation है, हम उसको देखेंगे by comparing the wage rate that could have been given in a perfectly competitive commodity and the wage rate which the monopsonistic guy is going to let its labor get hired by the monopolist. So perfect competitive में तो वो ये कह रहा था कि मैं ज़्यादा wage rates भी दिलवाऊंगा और ज़्यादा labor भी employ कराऊंगा. Have you seen it? Yes or no? हमने किया पिछले केस में.
Yes, ma'am.
अब let us see, let's say case 1. In case both the product and the labor market are perfectly competitive. अभी हम current situation नहीं discuss कर रहे, हम एक presupposed condition discuss कर रहे हैं. अगर हमारी product और labor market दोनों में perfect competition होती, तो मेरा VMP curve जो है वो market demand curve for labor होता, और जो मेरा SL curve है वो supply of labor curve होता. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
बेटा अगर परफेक्ट कंपटीशन होता दोनों में तो ये मेरा VMP मेरा डिमांड फॉर लेबर कर्व होता, बिकॉज परफेक्ट कंपटीशन में द वेजेस आर पेड अकॉर्डिंग टू द एवरेज वेज, तो प्राइस के अकॉर्डिंग पे किया जाता है, तो मेरा परफेक्ट कंपटीशन में ये मेरा डिमांड कर्व होता और ये मेरा सप्लाई कर्व होता. यस और नो?
Yes, ma'am.
I would have given how many wages? PL amount of wages, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
And how much labor I would have employed? OL2 amount of laborers I would have employed?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So this would have been the scenario. This would have been the scenario. The wages would have been equal to PL2 or OW3, and my labor would have been equal to OL2. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now let's look at the wage determination of monopoly in the commodity market and perfect competition in the labor market. अब हम इसको labor market में इसलिए compare करें to see the amount of exploitation that is being seen. अब second case में हमने ये किया है कि मैं तीन cases में बांट रही हूँ. पहले में ये किया मैंने कि ये perfect competition है, ये भी perfect competition है, perfect competition in the product market, so and perfect competition in the factor market. तो ये मेरा डिमांड कर्व है, ये मेरा सप्लाई कर्व है. लिख लो, पहले लिख लो, because then you will get confused. Case 1, if there is perfect competition in the product market and perfect competition in the labor market. अगली कोई क्लास तो नहीं है आपकी? Do you have a class next?
No, ma'am.
Can I take 5 minutes extra?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So पहला केस है perfect competition in the labor market, perfect competition in the factor market. In that case, VMP is the demand curve for labor and AW is the supply curve of labor. Wages given is equal to OW3. Level of employment OL2. Clear everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Case 2. देखो फटाफट से. Monopoly in the commodity market or monopoly in the commodity market या product market एक ही बात है, and perfect competition in the factor market या labor market. So market demand curve for labor यहाँ पे क्या होगा? The MRP, the demand curve for labor will be MRP. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
And the supply curve of labor would be the same because there is perfect competition in the labor market. The supply curve of labor would have lesser, right? Very good. So they both are intersecting at point N. Are they both intersecting at point N?
Yes, ma'am.
So how much is the wages given here? OW2 is the wage rate given?
OW.
Yes or no? And how much is the labor employed? OL dash amount of labor is being employed here?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So, just a second. So if that is true, what is happening under monopoly? The labor market reaches the equilibrium at M, and the wages are determined at OW2. Monopoly wage rate OW2 है, competitive wage rate OW3 है. तो कितनी exploitation हो गई जी? OW3 minus OW2 कितनी exploitation है? W3 W2 is the amount of exploitation.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Besides पहले कितनी लेबर हायर हो रही थी? OL2. अब कितनी लेबर हायर हो रही है? OL dash. So there is exploitation with respect to the labor hiring also. Can you see it? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Okay. Now let's look at the case 3. Case 3. Monopoly in the product market, monopsony in the labor market. मोनोप्सोनी लेबर मार्केट में वो अपने लेबरर्स को कितने वेज रेट दिलवाने की कोशिश करेगा? Where MRP is equal to MC, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So point of intersection will be at E.
Yes, ma'am.
And the level of employment will be OL1.
Yes, ma'am.
But who is sitting on the other side? The monopolist, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So this EL1 intersects the labor supply curve at what point? At point T. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So how much is this guy able to give employment? He is able to give employment only equal to OL1, but how much is the level of exploitation which is being exercised? OW3 minus OW1. So W1, W3 is the level of exploitation. Isn't that so?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So can you see the difference between the three cases? Monopolistic exploitation of labor is to the tune of W1, W3. All right. And this is a combination of W1, W2. And this is a combination of W1, W2 and W2, W3 exploitation. Yes or no? Yes, Viti.
Yes, ma'am.
So you can imagine in this part of labor exploitation, you know, you can very well imagine that the least is being paid to the laborer only up to the subsistence level, all right, and a lot of exploitation is going on. Have you understood this whole concept of monopoly in the labor market and monopsony in the factor market? Monopoly in the product market and monopsony in the factor market? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All of us, Muskan, Anshika, Shivani, everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Aditya, is it clear, bache?
Yes, ma'am.
Ankush, Simran, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So with this, we come to an end of the second case as well. Now we are left with two more cases. Most likely, I'm going to finish it this week. Most likely, I think I'll be able to finish your syllabus officially in the class. Let me take your attendance very quickly, and then I'll leave you.